So welcome everybody. Today, I think we're starting to look at what we want to do and how we want to expand what we do in this working group over the coming year. We had a nice little experiment last spring where we started to have more sort of topical panels come in and start to talk with folks to look not just at sort of presenting current existing infrastructures, but to talk about the needs and the utility of different things put together in ways to try and sort of build out some community around these. The first one that we did involved Jay and a few other folks around sort of the cybersecurity topic. We had sort of 2 meetings about that, and I think it was quite successful in that there are conversations and things happening on all of that now, and I think that's sort of what we're looking for. But before we start getting into all of that, I think, as usual, I look around. I think I know most everybody, but it's probably a good idea for us to just do sort of a round of introductions. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Niall Gaffney. I'm the director for data intensive computing. My background is astronomy and astrophysics, but largely around archival science and data workflows and data analysis. I previously, prior to coming to TAC 8 years ago, I was working for the folks who run the operations for the Hubble Space Telescope and a few other facilities that are orbiting the Earth about 300 miles up, and have a lot of background in just how to make data workable. And so that's sort of where I come from, but enjoying working in a lot of other fields now. Taking the experiences I have and learning new things. So I'll go down the list as I've got here. So Jeremy, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Even though I know you're here on loan.
Yep, I'm here on loan. I'm filling in for Christopher Daly. I'm a project manager at Renzi. I work with the big data hubs a good bit, so I see some familiar faces.
Thank you. John?
Sure, I'm John Goody. I'm the executive director of the MGHPCC. I'm the steering committee for this merry band. Now, I'll just a little connection, Niall. My father, when he worked for the Navy, was responsible for moving the Hubble Space Telescope from California to Florida before it was launched.
Oh, really?
A little bit of history, yeah.
Well, they're doing
really
that with
careful.
the Webb telescope by boat as well, going through Panama. So yeah. And there may or may not be some extra security on that one.
Right.
People hear the words gold-plated mirror. Anyway, that's cool. All right, and of course everything shifted here, but I'll go with the next person, Anton. Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Anton Verliga, and I'm a senior HPC engineer at the Northwestern University, supporting the research computing infrastructure, large cluster. So my background is mostly the large data and data transfers. Plus I'm leading the cybersecurity efforts to improve around our instrument. Thank you.
Cool. Christine?
Hi, Christine Kirkpatrick. I'm at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. I mean, usually I'm at my house, obviously, my spare bedroom. I'm an infrastructure and a data person, and I'm PI at the West Hub, among other things. My personal research these days is in how to make data AI ready in an efficient way. Maybe I'll leave it there.
Great. Jay.
Thank you, Niall. Hi, I'm Jay. I'm Professor Yen in computer engineering at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm also the director of global outreach for Global Cybersecurity Institute at RIT. So thank you, Niall, for talking about the earlier workshop panel thing that we did back in spring. So since then, there were a few different things going on around the world. They include a workshop that Salgado and I we co-organized in KDD. And there was another one that was organized by University of Virginia, Indiana University, including Vaughan, and George Washington University that's talking about data curation for cybersecurity research and education. There was a few others, AI ML for cybersecurity workshops happening over the summertime, and I think that we'll continue to see more and more of that happening and then going on. So thank you for inviting me back to this working group, and look forward to continue contributing to this the mission.
Sounds great. And yes, no invitation needed. Everybody can just come.
Yeah.
So Lauren, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. I'm Lauren Close. I actually work with the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub. I've only been in this position for about 4 or 5 months, so I'm just kind of introducing myself to different groups, but I work mainly in operations and communications for the Northeast Hub.
And let's see, of course, everything's gotten shuffled up here, so I don't think Jim, I don't think you've introduced yourself yet.
Hi, Jim Wilgenbush. I direct research computing at the University of Minnesota, and that includes the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, as well as USpatial and our Informatics Institute. My research is in phylogenetics, and I still do that periodically in the evenings and on weekends. But otherwise, I'm involved with sort of managing our operations here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and all of our system campuses.
Good to hear from you again. And Carolyn, you want to introduce yourself, and welcome.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Doobie. I am from Cloudera. I am working with some folks here to bridge the gap between academia and the real world, or the industrial world. I am a cybersecurity, data science, and data expert. So looking forward to working with everyone.
Great. And Melissa.
Hey everybody, Melissa Cregan. I work at SDSC with Christine, formerly head of the Midwest Big Data Hub, part of a few other projects. I'm also working on AI readiness, but from an organizational perspective, and also looking at federal data decision making in AI readiness as well. I think that's all I'll say for the moment. I will later on, when we talk about potential scheduling for the year, I've got a pitch to give a presentation, a couple actually, me and somebody else. So.
Great.
When we get to that part, I've got a couple things to add.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I know it's a little earlier on a Friday, but it's still Friday after a week, a compact week of Zoom meetings for all. So thanks for joining today. Just a couple of things before we start talking about the new direction on all of this. So we do want to get as much input from folks about topics and other pieces that would be useful to for us to understand, what potential topics, what potential things we could do. There's a Google form that has been circulating for a little while. Folks haven't seen it. Maybe we can send out another reminder email with that to the list, but Jeremy just went ahead and posted the shortened URL there in the chat. So if you want to right now, go click and do it rather than listen to me drone on about it. We'd like to hear from folks on that, and also just circulate it around to other people who would be interested, who, either as somebody who's interested in either presenting or hearing about specific topics and how they can get to be involved in these. I really do want to try and make this not just about the providers, but also bring in some of the consumers of all of this stuff, because that's where the real magic in the combination of conversations usually take place. I probably don't need to really remind everybody that we are now going to be on the first Friday of the month at 1 o'clock, since we're all here, but this is a new time for us. And really is to sort of try and well, see if moving it to an earlier time gets us past the very end of Zoom fatigue on Fridays, which I know is real. Trust me. But we want to, make it more convenient for people. And as I mentioned to Christine, make it so that I'm the one who's missing lunch when I come, as opposed to others. So you can't pick a perfect time. So, but the topic really for today is that we want to hear from folks about suggestions or recommendations, or just talk about what sort of topics we want to cover in the coming year. So over the summer, there was sort of some back and forth in emails. And so we wanted to have, something at least set up for October on this. And I know there's a lot of good stuff going on around data archive, and this is sort of in the true cold storage and real archiving, not just sitting on disks somewhere, but real preservation, I believe. And so we've got 3 speakers who are going to come in and talk about the systems and the work that they're doing around these things in different areas, from high energy physics to large scale tape archives. I think it'll be an interesting talk about how what's working, what's not working, and what we need to do to be able to do a better job of something that I think people don't appreciate how complex it is outside of the people who actually wind up doing this archiving. It's not just sticking something in a closet. So be nice to hear from folks. We're going to do sort of a follow-up sort of cybersecurity panel. Florence is going to help talk with Vaughn and some other folks to sort of get that going, and maybe hear about the pieces that Jay was talking about as well. So we can touch base back in that in November. And then looking at December, they've got right now sort of a microscopy panel. I know we've got some interesting things going on in many different areas around different forms of microscopy and imaging, which would be a nice panel to have. But I don't know, we haven't got a panel yet on that, and so I think we're sort of open to discussions on that. What we really would like to do with these is to see if we can do the same sort of thing that we did with Jay's group, which is to have a discussion as the panel, and then maybe a follow-up afterwards to start to let people, once the talks have sunk in, give people a chance to, talk to one another afterwards and start those collaborations, or the beginnings of those moving forward, sort of not necessarily taking place, in the this time scale, but moving out into other sort of breakout areas, and then hopefully reporting back to us about what's going on and keeping us informed on things. So with that, I will stop droning on about all this and open up the floor. And since Melissa already said she had some pitches, why don't I just go ahead and toss it over to you, Melissa?
Great. Thanks, Niall. So I have an eager award from NSF to look at the public access repository with respect to, to think about community readiness for depositing metadata records on data and other related products into the NSF public access repository. That policy is anticipated shortly to open up first voluntary, but then later required deposition of metadata records into the PAR on these other kinds of products. And so I've been developing just a short presentation on the public access repository, and then doing some discussion with community groups so that can inform sort of what kinds of materials would be fruitful for both community engagement and awareness around these things. So, moving toward first order products beyond publication. So anyway, I'd love to do that maybe December or February. I'm open, but a bit later in the year would be fine. The other is that I had a call recently with Lynn Pouchard at Brookhaven. She's been working on computational reproducibility for a couple of years now. And I know that we've got some other folks in our sort of colleague group here who are working on reproducibility as well. And I was thinking a nice webinar with a couple of people doing computational reproducibility, particularly for machine learning AI would be great, because it directly affects, you know, management of software and workflows and even sometimes hardware setup. So anyway, that's my other thought, and I'm happy to help put that together.
I think both very good topics. Reproducibility is just such a huge topic. It's hard to cover in an hour. It's because, you know, just saying you know, software reproducibility, it's hard enough, but I think that would be a fantastic one coming up. And I think, yeah, it would be good for us to hear more about the public access repo and how we can make this most useful for folks. So I think those would both be very good topics. If anybody else has any sort of ideas around those or around other concepts.
I had maybe something to bring up in a different domain.
Sure.
I'll end up putting Jim on the spot. Jim, in we had an email exchange about the work you're doing with CASC on research priorities. And I think the two of us were thinking that might be the risk for a panel session at some point in the first half of next year. Does that still strike you as a good idea? And if so, we can elaborate on it.
Yeah, it does. I was looking back at our sort of email thread, thinking that we should raise that as well, and think about, you know, how to do that in a way that perhaps does a good job, at least at capturing the diversity of entities out there who are working on some of these top priorities might be approach. And this is where it would be great to get the sort of thoughts from this group, is to, you know, how to bring focus to something. And so just to put a little more toward this, so you could maybe comment effectively on it, is what CASC is doing is we polled our 90 some odd members and had an outstanding response from them to better understand what are sort of the top things that keep them up at night. And from that, we developed a surprisingly tight list of 4 things that keep people up. And so there was just a tremendous amount of congruence with respect to our members' answers to this poll. And that's useful for us as an organization representing these groups, because we're going to put in our fall meeting a little bit more meat on these 4 things by having some working groups within that meeting to help us make sure that we're all on the same page about what it means, what these top priorities mean to our member organizations. But, you know, what could we do with that information in terms of then, you know, getting other groups together to comment on this and put more focus and attention on these areas.
Just by way of curiosity, do the keep up at night concerns overlap what we're doing here?
Yeah, it does. I can give you the at least running titles of all 4. Yeah. Compliance and cybersecurity, no surprise there, tops the list. Support for team science / end-to-end workflows. So that's one topic. And so the challenges associated with supporting team science or end-to-end workflows is number 2. Keeping staff skill sets sharp, addressing diversity needs among our staff, retaining staff, recruiting staff is number 3. Number 4 is trying to improve alignment of federal funding with the research community needs. In other words, with the needs on our campus. And sometimes, you know, at a higher level, there seems to be challenges sometimes to find the right funding for the things that we think are priorities within our respective institutions. So those are the top 5 priorities. Again, like I said, those really stood out. There's a bucket that we have full of other things that are really important priorities as well, but there just wasn't as much agreement around those. And we're going to be treating those in terms of our position paper as more of, these are emerging needs, these are also important things, but there wasn't as much consensus as far as our membership was concerned as there was in the top 4 that I just mentioned.
So aligning some of those to this group is a little different. I don't know, but I can clearly see doing, sort of the first 2, or the 2 that sort of seem to align more with, the data sharing, with, clearly around cybersecurity and compliance, but I think the team science and workflows might be interesting, but then maybe even aligning them or having them aligned into some of the other discussions that we have. So maybe have somebody, talked to what the CASC, what's coming out of CASC and those sort of things as part of the cybersecurity panel. But then maybe the microscopy panel, we can talk, I'm just thinking maybe we could have somebody or some focus on, if there are particular topics. I don't know, microscopy is probably not right, but there are others where team science would come in to play and talk about, the shortcomings and what we may want to start to look for proposals around. Would that seem to fit?
Well, microscopy is a really good example of the second sort of big bucket.
Yeah. Imaging in general, or any sort of,
That's an end-to-end workflow where we often find that, our respective centers are asked to do this piece, right? And sometimes the only information that we get is this piece. But then as we sort of peel the onion, as we like to say, we discover that it's really connected to something much larger. And if we knew from the onset what that larger thing was, we could actually be much more effective in terms of developing the end-to-end workflows. And that's why we led with the idea of team science, because what we've discovered, at least amongst the working group on this topic, is that it really is sort of one of the challenges is sort of bringing together people who have different expertise and sort of meeting them where they are is one of the challenges when we start talking about end-to-end workflows.
But that does, Jim, I think, take us full circle to your original suggestion, which was to have someone representing the perspective of the large CAST community in certain areas, where the first one might have been the long-term storage. But I agree, microscopy is one that fits squarely in the team science domain.
Well, and hearing you sort of frame it that way as well. I mean, we just finished up here this 4-year DARPA project around synthetic biology, which essentially, in the end, what we wound up having to do was to make sure that we captured the entire, you called it the onion. I think about it as the circle of experimental science. There's intent, and then there's what happens, and then there's aligning all of that information, because nobody can ever agree on how to describe even something as simple as water in a chemistry experiment. But data normalization, and then actually then having common products that are useful, especially in an AI world, which was what that was a lot of regression going on in the end. Those sort of things would be useful to sort of expose, I think, also, to me, it'd be really interesting to make sure that everybody understands that that's what's needed. It's not just oh, okay, then we go use, we go use TAC for this step here because it involves computers, right?
That would be a neat panel. I'm reminded of a friend who I think 15 years ago set out to develop the TTL data book of synthetic biology. They ended up founding a company, but that notion of this branch of biology moving from research into engineering, where instead of discovery, you're actually trying to manipulate the world, is both a cool theme and one that fits totally in our wheelhouse, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to make sure that, I mean, it's DARPA, and it's not that anything's secret, but I would have to make sure that we can, we can talk about the details, but the actual flow and how we did things is definitely something I can talk to. You don't want an astronomer talking about the biology, trust me.
But I wasn't suggesting that we do that, but it feels like a panel that we could recruit people to that are both NSF and DARPA and NIH funded.
Well, and then I think that also dovetails quite well into Melissa's reproducibility for ML and AI. And so I'm sensing a spring here of some level.
I have, so now, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead, Jay.
I interrupt because the reproducibility is of a concern, not all the concerns on the workflow. I think there's one thing that I haven't heard a lot of conversation in this group. So if this is not of interest, then don't worry about it. It's more about, from the cybersecurity or even espionage perspective, that there are more intellectual property thefts or agents or spies really that doing a lot of things through this data. So there has been conversation in open source community and cybersecurity open source community particularly, thinking about that. What's the trade-off between making everything open source, reproducible, which is great. I'm an academia, right? I like that. At the same time, FBI agents is saying that, oh, be careful, and other people from certain countries when you come in here to steal your stuff, and not necessarily coming physically, right? Coming to your domain. So I'm curious whether this group has talked about whether the workflow, right, the reproducibility, and how's that trading off with concerns from, let's say, FBI. Is that of interest to this group or not? And as a researcher, I am curious about it, right? So I want to put my stuff on open source domain. I want to put the data there. I want to put the metadata there. And I want to have a workflow for my student that works. But am I concerned about someone's going to knock on my door saying that, hey, your process is not appropriate? It's a little bit more beyond compliance that was talked about, but because this might be some other issues, national security issues.
Yeah, Jay.
So let's not confuse open source and reproducibility, right? So reproducibility is that you can give someone else your results or the way that you did it, and they can do the same thing, right? Open source means that I let the whole world see that. So I think reproducibility, even if you're not going to open source, is still important, because whoever you're collaborating with, whether it's the business or whether you're collaborating with other researchers, you still need to be able to have that element of reproducibility and understanding of how you got the results that you got, and so that someone else could possibly do it. So I do see that concern though, Jay, throughout the industry. Like none of my customers want me to open source their AI that we're doing for cybersecurity. It's pretty hush hush.
Well, it's and that I agree with everything you said, Lauren, and then might overlay that Jay maybe brought up a interesting panel topic, which is, different points of view on open source, open science versus hiding stuff.
And then you get into there's sort of the security on that, but then there's also the portion around especially health data, and that's the everybody thinks of HIPAA as being the compliance part, but there's a lot of other pieces, a lot of other, I just call it hair, that hangs around that as far as the code or how you put things together for different systems, which that have
might
nothing to do
even-
with
yeah.
reproducibility until you get it translated into a layer where you can talk about it reproducibly. You know,
But that might even be, it probably is an entirely other panel, which is how do you navigate privacy regulations successfully?
Yeah, I think it is, John, a big topic, and I think I'm glad to have, you know, I'm glad that this was brought up, Jay. That tension is what you're speaking to between, you know, that I think is felt very much at the universities, where everything is supposed to be generally made available, and very few barriers to accessing data and code and so forth, while at the same time there is a very real need to, in many cases, protect the privacy of this data. And that tension is very often overlooked in our policies that we have, in data and openness policies that many universities have that are required by our Board of Regents or however you're governed. And the reality that when we work with the private sector, not exclusively pointing to private sector, but very often when we work with private sector, that they do have different expectations in terms of how that how the data will be used and so forth. And it's not always in a way, right, that we expect. For example, we've worked with very large companies developing code that they were explicit about making public as rapidly as possible, which was interesting, right? Why would you do that? And the answer is, you know, getting that into the public domain serves their purpose of not being, you know, in a position of paying royalties on something that someone later actually captured and made into a proprietary package. And so we've had, you know, interesting engagements with private sector that have both involved, you know, really keeping things secure to having a very accelerated path to making them public, more so than actually some of our academic colleagues who kind of want to make sure that the publication gets out there first. They're often big into the pre-publication to make sure that they don't, again, pay royalties to someone who makes it proprietary later.
Jim, I think that's a very good point. So I thank you for all of you sharing that, and Jim sharing that the story. I think a lot of this will be a good panel conversation, in my opinion, that helps researchers, practitioners to think about what's their role. I think this goes back to the workflow, not just about data, but also about source code. What a good practice is to actually avoid. I mean, in my personal opinion, I'm not a lawyer or FBI agent, right? But in my personal opinion, that sharing it out quickly is a good point, because I think overprotective of a lot of these things. I'm not talking about private personal information. I'm talking about protected of some of these algorithms or innovation advances. Is actually making it harder for the good guys, making it easier for the bad guys. Because good guys are following the law and not to do anything about it, but bad guys can do a lot of things about it. So yeah,
I like the idea of thinking about this in the context of team science and workflows. It could be a little bit difficult to manage, but maybe that could be a way in which we sort of put context around some of these subjects that might be worthy of a panel by themselves, right? So depending upon sort of what stage you are in, you know, fairly large workflows, there's a whole sort of bucket of issues that you might want to address. And so from the standpoint of, as we were talking about microscopy, there's that beginning stage of, you know, getting the data from the instrument, you know, to either researchers, to researchers in some form that they can begin to do analyses, is a whole subject that we spend a lot of time on, I'm sure everyone here, looking at various aspects of technology and compliance around. And so Then there are other issues in terms of data sharing and so forth that get into some of these compliance and security issues. I wonder, what I'm getting at is, I wonder if we might be able to use this general framework or general idea of team science or end-to-end workflows to try to target specific areas that are part of that and put them in the context of, again, that larger subject of team science.
I keep trying to weave all this together with reproducibility as well. That's maybe the broad topic, because I think all of this fits into that.
But it does feel like we don't really need to impose a theme. Team science is a really important dimension of all of this, but too general to have a panel on. And reproducibility is fundamental to science all the way back, to the Egyptians and before.
Well, I was going to say the first thing you do with reproducibility is you define it, because I guarantee you we all have a different definition.
You could have a panel on reproducibility, you're saying, yeah.
No, I know, but I mean, do you get the same numbers? Do you get the same results? Do you use the same data? Do you use the same workflow? I mean, all of those things mean different things to people.
Yeah.
Can I rerun the experiment versus just recompute it? And I think all of that, that's why it feeds into a lot of these things. So probably it would be good, I think, to start off with that, but then maybe go into, workflow and metadata normalization, which I think is, that's a big deal here for data sharing. And, we've had many people talk about individual systems to do that, but to have best practices exposed or ways to try and do, a better job of not having to reinvent the wheel every time would be good. Although, I've been in this business long enough to remember, I think it was Kepler was the first workflow engine that I worked with that, it's been surpassed by all sorts of things, and we've never come up with a general workflow environment. So, I think that might be, what are the challenges to that? I could see that coming in.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it though, Niall. I think like maybe just one thing would be to try to identify the challenges associated around data management with these end-to-end workflows or the team science that we're addressing, because that's gonna lead to things like reproducibility, maybe as a topic.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And then the other ones that sort of resonated was sort of this openness versus privacy versus intellectual property. Nobody said that, but IP is important, and that's exactly what Carolyn's talking about with those machine learning models. Nobody wants to give up the IP of what they are, but I think those are important. The tug and pull of that, and how you can do the, have those work together in an environment. I'm, sure I agree completely that openness can lead to potential security issues, but it's also hard to hide from math. So, does this give us an advantage on some of these things? I don't know. That might be an interesting one to do on its own. But then getting into, if we go through workflows and all these things, and then finally get into what we're really talking about is, how do we get this whole system working in a distributed fashion? How do you do sort of this big data sharing and have then things like AI and machine learning come into play? This is where metadata is crucial, and data cleanliness is even more crucial. So, that might be something to have, and then wrap it up sort of in May with, I'm not sure exactly, but I'm just sort of looking at the 5 meetings over the spring.
I actually had a tactical question. Is anybody taking notes in a shared place, or are we all scratching stuff on sheets of paper on our desks? We have, yeah, I got one too.
And it's all over the place. Only I can follow it.
But we have, I think we've established that we have a target-rich environment, which is great.
Yeah.
I think we've named more than 5 great panels. And I don't know if we have time, but if we were able to do some winnowing, which I think was where you were going, Niall, also.
Yeah.
To topics that we could then go recruit speakers on.
So we've got the notes. We've got other things. We were also gonna, I don't have the output of the Google Forms, so I don't know what Florence is going to have from that. So I will take an action to make sure that I get in touch with her and get that. We can sift that together.
Actually, I think we do have access, because I looked, when I logged in with the right Google account, I could see there were only like 3 replies. And
Okay,
one was from me and one was from Jay, I think. So
I think the third one was from me. So
maybe.
Well, then maybe I don't have to worry as much about that as I
I
thought.
think so.
But
and we can be Bayesian about it, right? We have a first cut at what the landscape looks like.
we have a prior.
Use the forms to modify it.
We have a prior. Now we can go.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So if you could just, Jeremy, can you link in here in, just let's get a Google Doc so that we can all throw in pieces of our notes and maybe start to asynchronously come up with some sort of schedule. I will go ahead and put one in as being, I guess I could do it.
If you want now, I can put one together real fast and throw it in.
Okay.
But somebody can do the prior and the rest of us can update it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll try and take my bad notes and turn them into, lists of all of the different things here, and then take a shot, just as our prior of what we might think about for the spring. I will also say we are still looking for panelists for the November and December meetings. So if people, I will, yeah, I can put those in there as well if people have suggestions for other folks on that. But we can continue to work on those a little bit as we go forward. But let's see if we can get a spring of meetings going through. And I would propose that, actually, I'm going to say right now, the first Friday in January is going to be close enough to New Year's and everything else that we skip the January meeting, and just maybe do February, March, April, May, and then June.
Yeah, that sounds good. And Niall, I think we have to think about, maybe there's enough subjects, as John mentioned, that sort of fall under this general framework that we call team science or end-to-end workflows. And
yeah,
there is a timing thing here where, for example, CASC will be, CASC is developing this position paper, and one of the items is specifically around what we're talking about. We could put together, I could commit to one of those 2 meetings, probably the December meeting, to sort of bring a panel together to at least frame the data challenges related to end-to-end workflows, team science. And then that way we would, that would be a larger framing issue that could then lead us into the specific topics that we've touched on.
Well, would we want to do that then for the February meeting so that we can then have that fresh on the ear and then can schedule that?
I mean, we could do it that way as well. I'm just worried that if we don't have November and December, we might be looking for topics, but yeah.
Oh, I think we have topics where we need to do some recruiting.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so, I think Von's already on the hook for the November cybersecurity. I'm sure we'll hear more on things from that. And then the December one, I mean, come on, that's a semester away. We can be gone in no time. But, I have at least a few folks that would have interest in presenting to that. And I'm sure there are others that we all can have talked to.
We might just even crowdsource that one into a doc as well.
Yeah, no, so what I was going to do is I was going to go ahead, let's just make the doc be the schedule. And here, you know, we've got November, December, October, November, December already sort of firmed out. And I'll take a crack at flushing out the spring. And then you all can throw darts at it and tell me where I'm wrong and start suggesting folks that would be good to talk to these panels and go from there.
We might also just, you might also just have a list of more sessions than we can do. And we could use some portion of our next meeting to crunch it down to a final thing.
Sure. No, I was going to do that. The top of it will be sort of the bullpen, you know, we'll do the Scrum style.
Perfect. Wonderful.
So yeah, we'll have the bullpen ready to go, and then we can, you know, if other people think that I've gone wrong or that there are other topics to add, we can just do it that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, in fact, maybe this is something that we should have as just
A running thing. Yeah.
a running thing at the top of this BD Hub sharing working group meetings. You know, we've got our charter and all that sort of stuff, but just general planning.
Yeah, we'll have next year, September already done pretty soon.
Let's hope so. All right, everybody. Well, we've hit 12:50. I will go ahead and say, is there anybody else with recommendations or ideas around this? Or
I would just have a meta recommendation that we make sure that our different ideas are communicated in a way that can bring in people who aren't aware they might be interested, like the microscopy is a good example. That would be really easy to advertise, so it's just the same old people who already know about it versus saying, you know, this exposes issues of large scale data and, you know, high data volumes or whatever we want to say.
no, I completely agree. And so maybe that's something that we ought to capture in here as well is marketing. You know, where else should we, you know, here's a topic for February. You know, what other places should we just send out feelers so that people might be interested in coming to the meeting?
And then the other,
Florence totally volunteered to be our marketing department. We'll have to,
well, she's not here, so we're going to
I
say
know,
yes.
so we can assign her the action.
Yeah.
The second thing, though, is I think we also need to hammer home the times when we represent something that's not being discussed in widely in other venues, right? The classic example is cybersecurity as a big data challenge, right? And so maybe also draw that out as well to help people look more towards this series.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of really the goal here, is to have the meetings that don't happen at other meetings. If this could happen at a CASC meeting, it should probably happen at a CASC meeting, right? So
well, and in 2 years, the hubs will go away and this will need to evolve, or it just stays as a volunteer group. But that's another question, maybe for another day.
the funding of this hasn't changed, so.
Yeah, that's true.
We've had no decreases in funding, which is great.
Right.
Well, although having the support of Jeremy and Renzi is pretty critical.
Absolutely.
But other than that, you're right.
People to keep us honest, you know, that and the management of that is actually very important to that. So,
but I think your core point that we need to be taking a unique enough slice through any given topic to make it worthwhile is really important.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? If not, as usual, I said it was going to be short. It wasn't. But we still got 7 minutes so that people can go and take 7 minutes off before they jump into another window.